Hello, and welcome to the Social Housing Podcast. I'm Gary Haynes, I'm the MD of Voicescape, and joining me today are Hassan Bahrani, who's the Director of IT, Cyber and Data Security at 13 Group, and Nick Atkin, who is CEO of Yorkshire Housing. Welcome both. Thanks for joining us today. Purpose of this podcast is to follow up on the white paper we published earlier this year called Embracing AI in Social Housing, to which both Hassan and Nick were key contributors. We've had a good response to the white paper, and the idea of this podcast is really just take it down a step in terms of detail and get some thoughts from Hassan and Nick on maybe how we can bring some of the themes we raised in the white paper to life. Really trying to dig into in a bit more detail, how do social landlords get started with enacting AI? How do social landlords collaborate better in terms of how we can make productive use of AI and machine learning in the sector? How we can overcome some of the FUD, or fear, uncertainty and doubt around AI and machine learning in the sector, and just try and give you a few concrete ideas on what you could or should be doing next. So I think let's get started with one of the key themes in the white paper, which is really, how do you get started with AI, given, even if you don't feel like you're proactively adopting AI as an organization, we can pretty much guarantee it's in and running somewhere in your operation, somewhere either in the contact center or in your IT department. It's probably there already. So as a social landlord, how do you go about structuring yourself to be ready to use it in a beneficial way? Who'd like to pick up?
I think for me, this is happening already. So it's not really for me a choice about whether you dive in or not. This is already happening. I can guarantee that every single organisation that's listening to this podcast, some of your colleagues right now are using AI. And so for me, it's about how do you create a framework that enables your company data, A, to remain secure, and also that you're not breaching customer sensitive data, but also B, that you're giving quite a clear signal to the rest of the organisation that this is a real opportunity, an opportunity to experiment, an opportunity to innovate, and an opportunity to use the power of AI to enhance the customer service offer that our organisations provide, but also remove some of the, what I call the grunt work, some of the non-value adding processes that we've got in the organisation. So for me, certainly at Yorkshire Housing, we've used Copilot. We've got that within our secure IT framework so that the information that people are pumping into Copilot doesn't go out into the wider world. And we'll probably talk about risks later, Gary, but that certainly is one of the risks. If you don't provide this as a framework in your organisation, people will be using it anyway, and there is then a high risk that your data is going out into the cloud and will be used for future AI algorithms. Some of that you'll want to share, some of it I guarantee you probably don't.
Hassan?
Just building on to some of what Nick said, I think outside of the technical stuff, it's about, in my opinion, having a culture where you can experiment without the fear of failure. So trying something out, failing fast, making sure that you've got a bit of an innovative culture within the organisation, ensuring that teams have got that time carved out of their day to try something new, whether that's AI or otherwise. And then also it's just that appetite, I think, within the organisation to, explore automation opportunities, not just AI, but automation opportunities. And again, Nick kind of touched on this in terms of, I was going to play this game of like AI bingo. If I mention all of these kind of buzzwords, then I was going to contribute to charity, but I think I'll be very, very skint if I do that after this. But having the right guardrails is a bit of a buzzword, isn't it? But what I mean by that is by having that secure IT environment, making sure that you can fail in the right environment, the right way, ensuring you've got, things like pseudo-anonymize the data, so you're not using real world customer data when you're trying things out, and then going into some of the things around risk, which I'm sure we'll explore later on in the podcast.
Yeah, I think they're both valid points. I think certainly from the customers we engage with, we're not getting a lot of organizations saying, how do I stop AI make its way into our
Yeah.
daily operations? It's already there. It's about how do we have some guiding principles on what we should and should not adopt, and how do we make sure that we use it in some kind of consistent way that gives us business benefit. And we're a pioneer in the use of AI and machine learning, certainly in the software stacks that we deploy. So we're firm believers that when used well and with the right guiding principles, then it can deliver significant value. But how have both of you in your organizations gone through that process of realizing it's there, it's happening, actually it's already happened, and then driving some kind of greater consistency and awareness within your organization? Nick, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think, as I said before, this is one of those pivotal moments. This is a moment for some of your listeners, and I'm going to say things now that really shock them. There was a time before we had something called the internet. So goodness knows how anything works, but there was no internet. And I remember when the internet first came out, people sort of said, this is a flash in the pan, it's a fad, it won't last, it'll go away. And I'm so old that I even remember a time before mobile phones. And I remember when the only people who had mobile phones were bankers in City of London, carrying these huge Nokia bricks around with them. And again, people were like thinking, why on earth do you need to take a phone on the go? It's that moment in time. And we'll look back on this podcast in 3-4 years' time and probably giggle about the fact that we were even talking about getting started. I think the risk is that organisations try and over control this and over prescribe. I think by the time you have gone through setting a policy, setting a framework, agreeing how you're going to use it as a business, the pace of change of AI is exponential. So the moment you actually sign off your policy, it's already way out of date for where this is heading. So it goes back to Hassan's point before. It's a cultural thing around explaining to people the risks if information is taken outside the safe environment that you set up for people to experiment in. But it's actually leading from the front. It's leaders in the business saying and talking about AI and explaining how it can be used as a force for good, how, robots aren't going to take over the world, it's not going to replace everybody's job, all those sorts of things and all the nonsense that you can sometimes hear in the mainstream media. But I think it's a cultural shift, and it's also about the narrative that you have in your business. And I thought Hassan absolutely nailed it when he talked before about failing fast, failing cheap. And as a Yorkshire-based organisation, anything that's cheap we absolutely love. So I think giving that sort of cultural permission to experiment and to use AI, but within a safe environment, recognising some of the data leakage issues that you can potentially have as a risk.
How have you dealt with that, Hassan? I mean, in your role, we went through your job title at the start of this podcast. You've got responsibility for ensuring data security and cyber security, and there are opportunities, as Nick has said, for someone to adopt an AI approach or an AI tool in an organization and inadvertently cause some kind of issue. But I 100% agree with you, Nick, that if you spend a load of time framing up a long, convoluted policy about all the things you should and shouldn't do, it's a complete waste of time, because by the time you've got approval for it, it's been superseded. How did you approach that in your organization, Hassan?
Well, firstly, I couldn't get rid of the image of Michael Douglas with that big fawn on the beach in Wall Street when you mentioned that, Nick. That really linked in when you said that. I couldn't get it out of my head. I had to mention it. But it is we're on a journey at 13 Group. I wouldn't say that we've absolutely nailed it. We've got ethics policies or even AI mentioned in policies. I think we're on that journey. So this is just kind of me talking about how potentially we would do something like this. I think that's to be open and transparent. But where I think most organisations should start is probably a basic level. So you've touched upon what most organisations are probably already using this technology. We use it in a very primitive form in terms of OCR technology, so optical character recognition. So we use it to do invoice reconciliation. We've been doing that for 5 or 6 years now, and people don't realise that that is a form, a fairly primitive form of AI, and we've been able to do that responsibly without the use of any policies or ethics policies, etc. So I think you can dabble within AI without having to have all this onerous governance in place. But generally, there's got to be those overarching principles around data protection, ensuring you've got your information governance framework in place. You've got to have all of that, and most of it covers indirectly the use of AI. Do we explicitly mention automated decision making? No, we don't, but we know that that's a guiding principle that we wouldn't do at 13 Group, but we don't specifically mention it in a policy, for example.
Yeah, I think when we went through this process within VoiceGate, we found, and I've said this to a couple of social landlords we've had this conversation with, we found it a lot easier to frame a broad box of where we draw real hard lines rather than trying to invent a whole policy about everything we may or may not do. We firmly believe, and we've demonstrated, that the use of AI and machine learning can drive real productivity in this sector and allow more human engagement, more meaningful human engagement by automating, as you said, Nick, the grunt work out of people's daily lives. So we see real value in that. But we made fairly strong going in decisions about what we wouldn't consider doing. So, for example, all data has to be secured. Of course, we have to be compliant with all legislation. Data security and segregation is absolutely paramount. We're not going to automate access or denial to services for a tenant. So you could conceive of an AI utility that looks at someone's personal history, looks at their credit record, looks at any other information and makes an automated decision as to whether you should allow them to be a tenant or not. And we said, we're never doing that. That is never going to be part of what we do. And the guiding principle you mentioned in the white paper, Nick, we've adopted informally, very strongly, which is, if in your gut that doesn't feel right, you feel like you should be doing that, then don't do it. And you can write a very long, complicated policy, but I think that nails the key point.
Yeah, and I think it's another classic example where all too often organisations, and my own, is equally guilty of this. Sometimes we try and tell people too much what they should and shouldn't do, and actually they're grown-up adults. And that gut test, I think, stands the test of time, if you pardon the pun. But, if something doesn't feel right, then as a grown-up adult, then it probably isn't. And you've got to ask yourself, what is making me feel that sense of doubt, that question mark? And stop what you're doing and find out what it is that's creating that question mark and then decide how best to proceed. I think sometimes we de-skill people by over-prescribing what they should and shouldn't do, instead of just actually treating them like grown-up adults who can make perfectly rational decisions.
To that, Hassan?
Yeah, I think, again, it was something that at 13 Group, although it's not really related to AI, we had this conduct policy that said you should behave in this way, and you could get to the nth degree about what you should and shouldn't wear. Should you be coming into work inebriated, for example? Of course you shouldn't. You should. So we went on a mission with that policy, and we just had guiding principles, so we weren't prescriptive, and I think that is the same type of thing we should be doing with AI as well. And it's always a challenge, isn't it, between regulation, legislation. If you've got a data protection office, of course, they're very risk averse, so they do want to say it very prescriptive, but there's got to be that fine balance. And I love what Nick said, which is, if it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And I think that's just in any walk of life, isn't it? Not just when it comes to the application of AI, it's just anywhere. I do love that.
Yeah, we agree. I think if you put yourself in an average tenant's shoes, not that there is an average tenant, would it feel okay if your social landlord was doing X, Y, and Z? Would it feel okay if they were looking at your credit history and making a decision whether to shortlist you for a tenancy or not? No, it wouldn't feel okay. I wouldn't want to be treated like that. So that's outside the red line in terms of things that we would want to consider, which is good because there's so much more inside the red line of what you shouldn't do than outside the red line. So much opportunity for AI to make a real difference in a sector that I think has huge potential to drive up quality of engagement and drive down the cost of running processes and cost of services to the tenant's benefit and the organization's benefit. We very strongly think that it's a win-win. You must have seen that. I mean, Hassan, you've already talked about an example of just that automation use. But how do we sort of emphasize these win-wins and de-emphasize the FUD that goes on, not just in social housing, but broadly about AI being scary and something to be afraid of, when most of the time it's a useful tool?
Yeah, I think the way I would personally tackle it is really looking at what the impact is for the customer by doing this. So we talked about invoice reconciliation just as a very fairly primitive example. That means that frees up our accounts department to be able to do more human things, which might be paying our suppliers quicker and on time, which then has a direct impact on our customers. We've done a lot around universal credit automation. Really great example around this, which now the DWP have published on our website, with 13 Group taking the lead on it. We were asked to, I think all housing associations were asked to do this. 10,000 universal credit claims needed to be put on a portal, and it was a call to arms for lots of human beings to jump on and do that. We used robotic process automation to automate that process within a couple of weeks, and that has saved us thousands of hours of time for our not even our back office staff, actually, our customer facing staff. And we've, as a really good example of collaboration, we've shared that technology with other housing associations, and as I mentioned at the start, we've informed DWP policy on that. So I think it's really just concentrating on what the impact is for the customer. So not what problem you're trying to solve, but what impact it would have on the customer. I think if you just lead with that, it's relatable to the business stakeholder. If you start talking about RPA and OCR, for me, they just turn off. But if I could say I can save you thousands of hours, they're all ears then, aren't they?
And you were also having to take staff off frontline tenant engagement duties to deal with filling in 10,000 forms by hand.
Correct.
So, tenants were going to suffer without automating that process.
Yeah, exactly. Not only directly suffer because we're not out on their estates and we're not with our customers, but potentially there's that potential of credit claims not being done on time, so that has obviously a financial impact as well. It's just that is just such a good example of why it worked at 13 Group is that robotic process automation. Again, we're not talking about large language models here, some of the more exciting stuff in the world of AI, but the primitive forms of it have worked really well at 13. And I think that if you can start with those things first, then move on to things like Copilot, or partnering with companies like VoiceScape, who can kind of in some way shoulder some of the risk, I think that also helps.
Nick, do you want to comment on that?
I think it's a classic about the role of a leader is as a storyteller, and I think that's even more so in terms of things like AI. So I think for me it's about how you communicate the successes, the things that have worked really well, but also being really open and honest. If you're saying that to people that you want them to fail fast and fail cheap, also the things that haven't worked and why, and what we've learned from it, and what we'll do differently going forward. So I think if you're doing that, you're showcasing the impact of AI. It then acts as a motivator to engage with the wider organisation. but also that spills out. So we start having conversations like this, where myself and Hassan are talking about, well, actually, what Yorkshire Housing are doing is a similar journey to 13. So there's an opportunity there to spread that outside your business as well. But also it's about celebrating the stuff when it does work. And certainly as I know my own organisation, we're not particularly great at that. We're always thinking about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And all too often we don't actually focus on all the good stuff that's happened. So I think it is about just pressing the pause button sometimes and celebrating the stuff that has worked really well, whether that's individuals or whether that's teams. And I suppose that again reinforces that message about the value of their efforts. And it is interesting. We've brought in an external advisor, an external specialist AI advisor. So Dr. Guy Marshall, he's got a doctorate in AI. I mean, he's got the brain the size of a planet. I think our sort of our gravitational pull has changed as a result of Guy coming in. But what he actually does, it's quite interesting. He just asks some really, really simple questions. That's all he does. But actually, it takes you on a bit of a journey of that. Well, oh right, yeah, we've moved forward on that. Forgot we'd done that. Or actually, we haven't done that check and balance on some of the things that we've got in the pipeline. So I think celebrate success, be a storyteller. That's a key leadership role and responsibility. But also don't be afraid to bring in some external support, because nobody in the business has got all the answers on this. And there are some people out there who are doing this 24/7, 365.
Yeah. What about you, Hassan? Have you engaged any, apart from VoiceScape, any external third-party input to this conversation?
We haven't, but I think Nick's absolutely right. You should. There is people who have got doctorates in this and therefore a best place to be that critical friend or do the checks and balances. But most importantly, just look at where you're at now and celebrate. Maybe not in every housing association, but a lot of housing associations have been on a journey and they need to celebrate that journey they've been on. So we don't use any external consultants, but what we have done is we've developed our own Microsoft 365 development team. So we're really exploiting the AI tools that are within the 365 stack. And the formulation of that team, there's only two in it, but the formulation of those two skill sets was literally based on the benefits of that universal credit bot. So the team didn't exist. We had some skill sets that we felt could assist in this business problem. We tried something. We had that culture and freedom to just try something. It worked. The business recognized the impact of that skill set, and then as I said, we created two roles specifically on the back of that value being proven with the universal credit bot. So in terms of frameworks, I think, I know we might speak about this a little bit later on. I think the most established example of that for me is something that I've been party to at the Disruptive Innovators Forum. So there's a gentleman called Andrew Burgess at Greenhouse AI, and he really, in my opinion, simply talks around, mapping the company's objectives against your challenges and values, then looking at AI maturity levels, which then should correlate into a prioritized list of AI. I'm just regurgitating what Andrew said, but for me, it was just the most perfect example of having some sort of starter, some sort of framework into doing that. And I think leveraging networks like the Disruptive Innovators Network can help if you don't want to partner with a consultant, for example, or you don't have the money to do that if you're a smaller housing association, for example.
Yeah.
I think if I can add to that, I think one of the things that we learned from that process was that we were looking at AI the wrong way round. So we were thinking that we'd start with AI and then do a human check and balance on everything at the end. And actually, the overwhelming sort of evidence base is that AI adds most value at the end of the process to make sure you've not missed anything, rather than at the beginning. And a quick example, if you went to see a consultant today and you were amongst 50 other patients that consultant saw, would you rather AI scanned all the scan results and then gave a shortlist to the consultant to review, or would you rather the consultant reviewed those scans and then put it through AI to say, have I missed anything? My preference and my life would be on the latter option. I'd still rather have that human intervention, but just with AI as the check to make sure nothing has been missed. And I think that's probably informed and shaped certainly the approach at Yorkshire Housing, in terms of the AI is there not as the panacea and not to fully replace human intervention, but it actually, as we mentioned before, Gary, takes some of the grunt work out of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from sharing the successes. And it's one of the things that we want to try and get out of the white paper that we've collaborated on, and podcasts like this, but by no means just this. Because I think there has been a period of some years where all you've heard is the fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the potential negative impacts of AI and machine learning. And in that sort of darkness, then FUD is going to thrive. Whereas there is so much to be gained. And this is a sector where people are way more open than many other sectors. You know, lots of landlords talk to each other. You do collaborate. You exist in these working networks. You share good ideas. But I think the more everyone talks about the benefits of using this kind of automation and technology improvement, the better. I mean, just step back from what 13 Group did with your robotic automation on UC verification. Why would you take 100 people off frontline service duties to fill in forms if you didn't have to? I mean, why would you? It's a nonsense. So I think one of the things we're really, really keen on, particularly with such a broad spectrum of social landlords, from very large to very small, not everyone has the resources to build out an internal IT team focused on AI. Not everyone has the resources to build some kind of incubation center where you can try 10 great ideas and latch onto one. What are your thoughts on how people who are more at the leading edge, how you can publicize and share those good ideas and those successes and those maybe not failures, but things that didn't work out quite so well, with people who don't have all the resource to be at the vanguard of adopting AI and ML? Is there more the sector can be doing to idea share?
I think just from a technology perspective in social housing, I've been in the sector for 11 years in different roles, junior and otherwise. I think now it feels to me that there's more collaboration than there ever has been from a technology angle. I can't speak for other areas, but I feel like there's more forums. There feels like there's a bit of a rapport building up between housing associations. I think Salesforce, we're not users of Salesforce, so this is a very independent opinion, that they've got the concept of the commons, and I love to see housing associations now building things and sharing that with other HAs. I don't think that happened. Again, I might just be not seeing this at my junior levels 11 years ago, but it didn't feel like to happen. It was very siloed, and I think that now it's been on a journey over the last 4 or 5 years where I do think we are collaborating more from a technology perspective. I see it all the time. We are consumers of Vantage. We collaborate heavily with Vantage, and we know that there's about 15 to 20 other IT directors on there talking about sharing ideas. Oh, how did you do that? Can you give me the procurement document of how you procured this? So I love that, and I don't think we saw that probably even 5 or 6 years ago. Certainly I hadn't seen it. So I think we are collaborating more. And again, where we have developed things like the universal credit box, we've packaged that up and given it to other housing associations. So we've not sold it, we've not made money off it, we've just went, here's how we did it and this is what we did. And you can actually have the underlying code if you want it. I love that. I think that's just, it exemplifies what the sector should be about, in my opinion.
I think I absolutely echo what Hassan has said. I think I wrote a piece for our trade press Inside Housing over the summer, which I sort of said in my whole career, I've never seen the levels of collaboration that we're experiencing at the moment. I think that has been driven by devolution. So there are a whole raft of joint funding, joint project works, sharing of development pipelines. You know, who'd have ever thought that would happen, given how commercially sensitive that is, even 3 years ago. And also, I think the way that organisations are collaborating has changed. For example, Yorkshire Housing and 13 work really closely as a result of some of those devolution housing partnerships. It's not all perfect. I think there's still a lot of room for further development of that. I think Hassan has said that the development of platforms like Salesforce have helped with that. I think organisations like Hacked, like the Disruptive Innovation Network, and also absolute credit to VoiceScape. You guys, you listen and you go away and you come back with potential solutions. And we were at Yorkshire Housing relatively late to that VoiceScape party. But I think one of the key things that still gets in the way is systems. So particularly for those organisations that are still operating on what I call the legacy housing platforms. And it's interesting because, when you actually go into the code of those, many of them were written in 19 something as opposed to 20. So that limits the amount of ability to take data out of those systems through open APIs and start to use it and manipulate it. And then final one from me, it's fine getting the data out, but all too often housing organisations have not placed a value over their data, and as such the data is absolutely flawed. It's got lots and lots of errors in it, and so if you then run algorithms through that or run that through AI, it's that old adage of crap in, crap out. So you've got to make sure that whoever you're working with is confident that their data is sound and has been well looked after and nurtured.
Topic close to your heart, Hassan.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see me nodding there, and just linking back to my AI bingo card, data quality, data governance, they're all on that, because there's no point in.
I've won.
Yeah, so there's just so many, there's no point in exploring all this if you haven't got the guarantees around the quality of your data, the integrity, and the governance. And that has been a challenge for housing associations for as long as I can remember, and continues to be the number one challenge. And we've seen that in the consumer standards, everything, the sector risk profile, everything is pointing towards the quality of data, informing our decisions on what we do with customers, listening to our customers, changing our services about what they're telling us about, what do we do with our investment plans around our assets. All of this links back to data. And it's not just around the quality and the governance and the integrity, it's how we collect that data, how we keep it up to date, all the business processes that sit around that. That is a challenge I don't think I've seen. I'm envious of some housing associations of how matured they've got, but they've not nailed it. And I don't think anyone's nailed that. And I don't even think it's just social housing. I think it's just generally any vertical these days. It seems to be a huge challenge.
We take the view, obviously our AI solutions require data primarily out of the HMS that our customers run, or their data warehouse platform. We require that data in order to do the analysis and the machine learning that then delivers the risk profile and the productivity benefit. Without that data in, then there are question marks about the recommendations that we can make. But it's a fundamental part of the approach to the machine learning to do some kind of on-the-fly data analysis and data cleansing as we go. And our guiding principle is 80% is better than nothing. If you've got 80% of your agreements data, or you got 80% of your balances, I can at least do something with that. Don't do nothing just because you're not at perfection, because we all run organizations that involve humans. So even if you take a snapshot of today's data and make sure it's 100% clean in the time you've been doing that, some of your humans have maybe keyed in some unclean data. You'll never be perfect. So to gain the benefits, you've got to take that sort of 80-20 rule. But that brings you back to the concept of, well, don't deny or approve access to service on a 100% automated basis, because there's a chance some of the data in was wrong, informing that decision making. So back to your point, Nick, yeah, have that human check, support the humans, do a lot of the donkey work, shorten their to-do lists, but before they then enact those to-do lists, there's a human eyeball over what happens next. So it's about, you wouldn't build furniture by hammering all the nails in with your own forehead. You'd use a hammer. It's a useful tool as long as you understand what it's good for and not good for, what its limitations are. And some of those limitations are maybe driven by the quality of your own data. Don't stop using it. Don't not use it because you haven't got 100% confidence in your data. You can do these two things in parallel. And the tooling will tell you, this looks a bit wrong. Do you want to check this? Because it looks like an edge case or it's not fitting the pattern. So I think there is almost that, we see occasionally a reluctance to engage with the technology benefits that AI and machine learning can deliver because my data is not perfect. Well, it's never going to be perfect. And the tooling can help you understand where those imperfections are, but understand those imperfections are there and don't ever turn on Skynet and leave 100% automated decision making because human always needs to be involved. Do you get similar kind of concerns in your own? How did you get them over the tipping point of go away, Nick, come back in a year when I've cleansed all the data? It's never going to be 100% cleansed.
In some ways, it was a little bit easy for us because when we're in the middle of that transition to Salesforce. So in some way, we'll go from 12 disparate systems to one. So in some ways, we've had a bit of a golden opportunity to sort of go through that painful process. But I think, I was nodding violently, Gary, when you were sort of talking about the fact that as soon as you think you've got it all accurate, a human comes along and invariably they mess it all up. And I think it is about progress, not perfection, is a bit of a phrase that we have. And I think for me, something is better than nothing. And I'd rather we were heading in the direction, albeit perhaps slower than I'd want to be heading. But I would rather that we were making progress than sitting back and waiting for absolutely everything to be perfect and all fully lined up and ready to roll, because you will never ever get there. So you've just got to go with it. This is happening with or without you. It's happening all around you. And particularly in a leadership role, if you are ignoring this, then that is placing your organisation at risk, because people will still be doing this. I've got 850 talented colleagues. I pretty much know probably at least half of them are dabbling in AI every week, whether that's in their work or their home life. So, surely it's better for us to be able to harness all of that energy and that enthusiasm and that innovation and creation, and use it also to fill in the gaps where perhaps our data isn't as perfect as it needs to be.
And I think
guiding principles in 13 group.
Yeah, I think I love that. Just as long as there's some progress, I think that's amazing. I think that's the guiding principle everyone should use, as long as there's progress, because we won't be perfect. I think it's just ensuring that you've got a window into what your data quality is like. So that it's at 80% or 60% or 0%. So ensuring that you've got, you could have data quality tools like Interzeta, I think is a industry leader. We use that, and it tells us based on rule sets where we think the health of the data is. As long as you've got that kind of picture into where you're at, then you can make an informed decision. And I think that's the key thing for us. And then of course, as you've said, Gary, we of course send you lots of data. There is a process in which we follow to validate that data that we're giving you is somewhat right, perhaps not 100% right, but somewhere close to that 80% mark that you're looking at. And I think that's what that it's that key thing, that window into the quality of your data, ensuring that you can just have that picture of, is it at 80%, 40%, 30%, depending on what data sets are important to you. Could, in your world, it's, is their phone number correct? Is, the rent date? All of that is really important. And it's just ensuring that you've got that kind of that window, as I say.
And I don't think everyone is aware that the mere process of adopting an AI machine learning solution helps you get that window. I mean, I completely agree. It's very hard to make business decisions if you don't know where you are on that spectrum between 0 and 100%. But the mere process of taking your data and running it through the platform highlights where things are missing or they're not making sense. That's before you turn on automation and machine learning. It is a data validator by sheer dint of what it's doing, and that is a useful exercise because 13 Group now, by collaborating with us on that innovation a few years ago, you've now had a few years of business benefit of prioritizing those to-do lists, even knowing at the beginning of the exercise it wasn't perfect. You still got significant business benefits, and those continue as you then refine. So we see sometimes, I don't want to send you any data until it's perfect. And it's like, the earlier you send us the data, the clearer view we can give you about how imperfect it is, and then a targeted view of what you need to do to aim towards perfection. Not that you'll ever get there, because other processes are involved.
I think a really good example, if people want a quick test, is just run all of your customer date of births through AI. Find out how many of your customers are over the age of 100. Because when we've tried collaborating with other organisations, invariably most organisations have customers who are in excess of 160 years old. So we know that living in social housing is really good for your health and well-being and your life expectancy. But I'm not quite sure we can manage to claim that we'll get you to 160 years old. A really simple one, but if you don't actually know who's living in your homes and what their age is, how then can you start, for example, doing targeted campaigns around pension credits and whatever else that you're looking to do? So if and everybody listening to this is probably thinking, well, that won't be the case in my organisation. Well, you know what? It takes about 5 minutes to just do it. And surprise yourself, either positively or not so positively, about the fact that where your data's at.
Yeah, that is funny. I was laughing because that is a good example at 13 Group where we have that as well. It's not that many, but they were some of the. But the fact that you can highlight that and look at it, and it is just good to even talk about it, I think.
And if they are 160, then they definitely warrant a home visit, I think, and a pat on the back. But I think it's, the key point for us is don't wait, start now, because you need to be on the bus to be moving forwards. Otherwise, you're just being left behind without even realizing it. Okay, so we've all got examples of things that have worked, whether that's process automation or the application of machine learning, large language models, chatbots in contact centers. And I know it's hard to predict because you're 100% right, Nick. By the time we've been on this podcast, something's happened in the world of AI and machine learning that we weren't aware of. What do you think organizations should be striving for or considering in the next 12 to 24 months? What bleeding edge type things maybe should they be thinking about? That's a bit of a big question.
For me, I was always struck by the stat that was shared, I think by Ian Wright at Disruptive Innovation Network, when he said that the average car now, so your bog standard car, nothing fancy, has about 3,000 sensors. The average home has less than 10. So for me, I think the exciting bit is that sensor tech, smart home, whatever badge you want to put on it, but this stuff is cheap as chips now, and I think it's disposable. It's stuff that is revenue funded. This isn't a big capital investment, but I think the potential of the data that our homes can start to provide, linked to open source data like weather, crime stats, police stats, all that data that's out there. In fact, if anything, there is now too much, and it's about actually what is it that you ask the question of, and what data do you use to inform the response that you get through AI on that. But for me, I think over the next sort of 2 to 3 years, seeing that combination of getting our homes to be smarter, but also overlaying that with some of the external data that's readily available there, including real-time sentiment analysis in terms of what our customers are saying about us right now on platforms that we're not party to some of those conversations, I think that's the bit that really, those of you who watch on YouTube know, I've got no hair, but that makes what little hair I've got on the back of my neck stand on end. I think that's the really exciting bit. I think that's the bit that will really start to transform the quality and the ability for us to provide a much better customer service offer.
Hassan, what about you? What do you think?
Building on the sensor stuff, I'm really keen to see how it expands into tech-enabled care. So we talked about the health of our assets and our properties and all of the benefits that can bring us, and those stats are stark, Nick. I've not heard those, so they're really stark. It's how it can help the people to live longer when they're in the property. We've seen some really good examples recently. It's kind of there now. A lot of these sensors are there now, but it's using that AI engine to bring it to life. One of the best examples I had seen was the home in which this elderly lady had been living in. It checked what time the kettle had gone on every day, and that kettle had gone on later and later every day, and it was able to then ping a request off to the local GP or to their local family to say, look, we're noticing this kind of difference in time with the kettle going off, and actually it was early onset of dementia. And I think that for me is so powerful. It's looking at the person that's living within the property, and we're using all of those sensors. So I think depending on, I suppose, what your commercial appetite is to doing that, and working collaboratively with the local health authorities, I think that's something, if we can just get over that in the next 5-10 years, that's something, we've explored extensively at 13 Group. I think it's called Living Well, I think is the project type that we did. And we worked with Microsoft. We used an IoT innovator funding. They put 50 grand in. We put 10 grand in. We created a fake room. We put a little sensor in. It's called Granny Guard. And it just, it was a very surreal thing because it was in COVID, and we had the leadership team on there, and we had this guy from Microsoft just fall over on a Teams call, and then it sent, it detected that falling over. It sent an alarm off to the online platform, and then it dispatched someone to come to the house. So it was just I think there's a lot to explore in that world around tech-enabled care. I think there's a lot more that we can unearth.
Yeah, and that stuff's around now, isn't it? I was out running the other week.
Yeah.
And as I came around a corner, I tripped over somebody's dog that was off lead, fell over, and unbeknown to me, my watch had sent a message to my wife to say, Nick's fallen over. Next thing I get a call to say, you all right? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. How did you know? And yeah, so this stuff's already there. It's already available. People think that this is some big hardwired sort of, they've got to spend $3 grand hardwiring a house up. This stuff is cheap as chips. It's already there, and actually we just need to grab hold of it. And again, going back to that mantra that you said before, Hassan, fail fast, fail cheap on this. Acknowledge that some of it might last 12 months. It might not even last that, but it'll give us a good insight. We'll be able to use that and then get something else in that will provide us with the answer that we need.
Yeah.
Did the dog have a watch on?
Yeah.
No. Don't talk to me about the dog or the dog owner. Yeah.
Yeah, fine. So we think of, when we look at the last couple of years of AI, machine learning and social housing, you can think of it like an iceberg. Everyone talked about, be worried about your data, be scared about that. What about the uncertainties around that? Under the waterline, there's just vast potential, untapped potential to really deliver business benefit to a landlord, benefit to the staff, benefit to the tenants, and improve the customer experience massively from where it is right now. So, we're very excited about where we can go. And the purpose of podcasts like this, I think, is to bring the conversation more into the successes and the potentials than the things to be concerned about. People are right to be concerned, but if you latch onto the concerns and stick with those, you'll never move forward, and you'll never reap any of those My final thoughts either of you would like to share?
My my final thought, because Hassan's playing I'm not coming off mute so game, so I'll go first.
Yeah, I was going to play that chicken, but I think I won that one.
I can't stop myself. I love talking. My final thought is that is this a revolution? Not sure. We'll know in 2 to 3 years' time whether or not you want to class it as a revolution in how we operate and how we think and how we run our businesses. It's happening. It's there. It's now. It's out. The genie is out the bottle. There is a real risk if you try to ignore what's happening around you. I think this is a real force for good, and I would encourage everybody to fail fast, fail cheap, give it a go. Pick up 1 or 2 of the things that we've spoken about today on this podcast and give it a whirl. Do that within your organisation's IT infrastructure so that your information and your data is safe and secure. But I think people will be pleasantly surprised by some of the things that this reveals, as well as raising the odd eyebrow as well. But for me, just jump both feet in. It's progress, not perfection.
Yeah, I agree. I think embrace the potential of AI. Just go in with it. Don't be too. You've got to be cautious, of course. I've got to please the risk-averse listeners, of course. There might be some data protection people or cybersecurity heads of here. I've got to balance that. Otherwise, I'll be hung, drawn, and quartered by my guys at 13 Group. But you've got to embrace the potential of AI and the art of the possible with it. Really look at those outcomes for customers and how it can improve customers. So don't look at the technology, don't talk about the technology, but what are the biggest challenges facing our customers or our assets, like Nick said, around the sensors, and start with the basics, but don't hang yourself on them, like you said, Gary, around data quality and data governance. Don't hang yourself on it. You are on a journey, and you'll get to where you need to get to, but you don't be too scared. Embrace it. That's probably my closing remark on that.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, guys. Really appreciate your contribution today. Always a pleasure talking to you. Really appreciated your contribution to the white paper as well. Call to action for anyone who's listened to the end of the podcast. Just open up and share. Contact any one of us. Contact VoiceScape. Contact people who contributed to the white paper or this podcast. There is stuff going on, and the experiences of what's already gone on you can learn from and you can share. And like that sort of open source movement, you can plough your observations and your successes back into the community, because the benefits far outweigh the concerns. So, if you haven't read the white paper, download it, see what Nick thinks, see what Hassan and the other contributors think, and maybe we'll do more of these on other bits, because you could talk about AI for a long time, and if we're successful enough, maybe we'll get Arnold Schwarzenegger on one of them, but we'll see.